What's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today's Bryan and myself, and we are going to be going over some training questions and giving a little bit of update on our training. Bryan, what's the latest with you?
Yeah, I just came out of my active recovery week yesterday, so that was a full week off out of the gym. It actually flew by, to be honest. Like, it went by so quickly that it didn't even really feel hard. Like, I think the first 3 or 4 days I didn't even want to train. Like, I took the active recovery week, right at the perfect time, where I think if I would have done another microcycle, then I may have needed more than a week to like kind of get back to good. I actually was listening to a podcast the other day where these guys were like, yeah, I got myself into this like super deep hole from training too intensely, too much frequency, too much volume. And literally I stopped training and I didn't even feel good for 10 days. And I was like, man, you probably should check yourself a little earlier than that. But for me, I think I caught it at the exact right time. But this is kind of what I typically see in my active recovery weeks over time, is that the first 3 or 4 days, my motivation is really low and I'm just thankful that I don't have to go to the gym. And then days like the final 2 or 3 days, like days 5 through 7 or whatever, I kind of have this itch to get back in, and I start kind of like writing my programming for my next cycle, and I get excited about what's to come. And it didn't help that I had my hip extension machine arrive like 2 days before my active recovery week was over. So I had to take that guy for a spin. I did 4 reps at like half the weight that I would usually do, like a set of 8. And that was the one thing, like the one reason I stepped in the gym. Oh, I did abs. I did 2 sets of abs midweek. So I did 2 sets of weighted reverse crunches. And in regards to that, one of the things we actually mentioned last week about ab training was that both the movements we picked were lengthened overload. And we were talking about the barbell rollout or the wheel rollout, and then the weighted reverse crunch. And I realized that the weighted reverse crunch is actually not a lengthened overload movement if you do it with a cable. It's only lengthened overload if you do it with a dumbbell. So I was doing it with a cable, and it's interesting because usually I do it with a dumbbell, and I get really sore from it because of that lengthened overload. But I did my 2 sets with the cable and literally felt nothing. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point.
I have a question for you there quick. Are you doing that seated on the ground, or are you seated on a bench when you're doing it with a cable?
Yeah, I'm seated on a bench, so it's a slight downward angle, and then I have cuffs on my ankles.
Oh, on your ankles. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Understood.
I actually wonder if it would be better, though, if I use D handles and I put my toes inside the D handle, because the chain from the cuff kept like getting in my way and kind of distracting me a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that might be
So I think honestly though, I may just stick with the dumbbell reverse crunch going forward, because like we talked about, we're doing such low volume that I personally would like to pick more damaging movements than trying to do short and range overload movements where maybe I would need to do like 4 or 5 sets to get the same stimulus.
Yeah, I don't want to do that either.
But yeah, so active recovery week was great. I want to jump into a couple things about the last 2 days of training, coming back to it. But before I do that, let's hear what's going on with you and your training, and how's coffee, getting back into your life and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the ab training really quick. So I found the ab wheel at the gym, and I did it on Saturday. And in typical Aaron fashion, I pushed it a little bit harder than I had planned on it. But they were like, the reps were just going really easily. I had only planned on doing like around 10 to 12 reps. I ended up doing like a 15 and 13, but I felt really good. And then I was like, I still called it early. I don't want to crush myself, but I never got sore from it. I was really, really surprised. And I do them all, like I do a pause at the bottom. I try and like pause, touch my nose to the ground, even though it's kind of gross, I guess, in the gym. But I did do that, and I was really surprised that I didn't get sore. So I'm going to do it again. I may go train tonight. I won't have the time to train tomorrow, so if I do want to get it in, it will be like either tonight or Thursday, and I'll see there. But I was really surprised by that. But I'm glad I found it. Of course, after I bought one on Amazon, so now I have to return the one I bought on Amazon.
Or just keep it and travel with it. But dude, I feel like you need to add weight now. Like, who wants to be doing sets of like 15 to 20 on the ab wheel? Like, throw a vest on or something like that.
I do not know if the gym has a vest. I could throw like a 10-pound on my... I can't throw a 10-pound on my back. It'll fall off. I don't know. Yeah. I might maybe band it in some weird, like a reverse type thing or something like that, or I don't know,
Or do
but
like a drop set where you do like 3 on your toes and then go max reps on your knees.
I can't do any on my
I
toes.
think you could. Maybe if you went like 3/4 of the way out. I think if you can do 15 on your knees, you can do 1 on your toes.
Yeah.
Or go on your knees until you get to the bottom and then lift your knees so you're in like a suspended plank and then put your knees back out to roll back.
That's a good idea. That might be doable. Yeah, I'll play around with that. But yeah, I don't like doing like massive sets on them. But or what I'll do is like decrease rest period. Maybe I'll only do like 90 seconds or something like that, and that way they'll get much more difficult.
Yeah, totally.
And then on Sunday, right? I I had some coffee on Sunday. I had caffeinated coffee, right? We were going hiking up in the canyon here. Stopped in at Starbucks on the way out, and I got a tall dark roast, which is like the smallest size they make, right? I had about half of it on the way up because, of course, it's like a jillion freaking degrees, and you can't drink it for 30 minutes after you buy it. Mm-hmm. And then we went hiking for about like 2 hours, and then we went to one of the resorts there to like ride the summer chairlift just to see the mountain and stuff around like noon. So I had like the last like maybe 30% of it right around noon. Got a bunch of stuff done, food prep, everything. Go to sleep that night, and I cannot freaking sleep. I am tossing and turning, and I'm just like, my brain's going about all this work stuff and these different things. And I get literally Sunday into Monday the worst night of sleep I've had in months. And yesterday on Monday, I was dragging ass. And I was so upset. And I was like, I have to either have it at like 8 a.m. if I'm going to have a full one, or I need to go like a half calf. So next Sunday, that is my plan. I'm going to go like half calf and see like, okay, if I have one at like 9 a.m., 9:30, and I do, like a half the dark roast that I do like and half like a decaf, is that going to backfire as poorly as this one? But I was really surprised that like, I just could not sleep and everything else was the same. And then last night, obviously yesterday, I didn't have any coffee purposefully because I didn't want that vicious cycle to, kick over again, even though I did actually need it. I just, powered through the day. And then last night slept like a, little baby bitch again. And that was really nice.
When did you get back from the hike? What time?
Well, we did like kind of two, but I would say I guess why, what's the purpose of the question?
Because I'm curious if the issue with sleep could potentially be related to the excessive activity level, number of steps, thin air in the mountains, break of routine from norm, elevated cortisol levels, like a number of different things that could have taken place as a result that may not necessarily mean that it was the caffeine's fault.
Yeah, we hiked from like about 9:30 to like noon, and then we did do another like very basic hike off of the chairlift just to see a lake, and that was like maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes going. But I mean, it was like slow, chill hike. It wasn't like gnarly hiking by any means. We weren't pushing it really hard or anything. I just had that feeling of just like up and jitter, not quite jittery, but like just caffeinated really. And it felt great all day, because it was weird for a Sunday. I ended up like, I was like, I'm going to take an hour and get some work done. I got all my food prep done, all this different stuff. And then at night, I just could not sleep. And it was like the only thing different was that I had the full caffeinated coffee, even the smallest one. So, I mean, it does work. That's the upside is it works now, and it works too good, and then I can't go to sleep, which kind of sucked.
That's good it works, though.
Yeah. But that's about it for me. I was thinking about when you were talking with the active recovery phase, and I was like, I never kind of feel like I need one of those, or I reach a point. And then I remember just it happens with the lifestyle. Like when we show up here, I didn't go to the gym for like 6 days because we were driving for 2 days, and then just trying to reintegrate life, get back on top of work and stuff. And I end up doing that every 3 to 5 months, and it's like there's my kind of forced deload, and that it'll usually happen more than that because we'll take a trip somewhere or something. So just by that, I always have those like kind of pseudo deloads where I'm forced to I just can't go because I have other priorities I need to take care of first.
Yeah, someone actually DM'd me with kind of a similar story. I think yours is a little bit different. But they were basically like, I tend to have these life deloads where like life deloads for me like twice a year. And they go, but what do you think about that being like the same as taking active recovery? Because the way that I phrased it on my story when I took a poll was, how often do you intentionally, or do you intentionally take a week off every year? And I think that there's like a subtle nuance, distinction between intentionally taking a week off versus having life deload for you. And what I mean is that for most people, and your situation's unique because it's generally like a factor of relocation, which definitely does come with some stress in it, but it's not as stressful as like when someone says life deloaded for me, they usually mean I got sick, I got injured, my kid was in the hospital, I had a baby, like any number of other things that are like massive stressors in life. And so I don't know that you're necessarily getting, I wouldn't bet on the fact that you're getting the same recovery in that week when you're taking a deload because life forces you into doing it versus just being in like a calm, chill place where maybe the stress is that you're just a little overtrained and then you opt to take that week off. So just like kind of a subtle nuance there.
I would 100% agree with that. I mean, with some of these things, when life deloads for you, you're swapping training stress with another stress of life,
Yeah.
which is job related, children, moving, something else. So I know, and that's kind of why I do not really force the try and train when I do have a move or whatever, because it's a stressful time and I know I'm not going to produce really effective training sessions. The stress is already higher and I'm just basically betting on just sleeping and trying to get back to my baseline before trying to, stack more on top of my plate.
Yep, totally. So coming out of my active recovery week, I had my first training session yesterday. It was a back and tricep focus session with a little bit of chest work in there. And I was extremely cautious in the sense that I didn't do a third set of any movements. I don't usually do 3 sets of big movements, but I often do 3 sets of like smaller isolation movements. I also didn't do any partials or any cluster sets, but I still pretty much took stuff to like 1 RIR or whatever. Maybe I didn't go to like failure and I didn't go, beyond failure with the partials or clusters, but I trained hard. And I'm actually very surprised today that I have no soreness, like none. Like I was just sitting here, if you were watching YouTube, like reaching my arms over my head, kind of bending to the side, like, rounding over, like any soreness in my upper back, like checking all these things. And it's literally like nothing. I don't think that really means anything too much. Like, I don't think I need to like worry about it as like, oh, I didn't train hard enough or anything like that. I just think that it's good that I did that. I think like I would much rather come back from active recovery and not be sore and be in a position to then move forward next week on those movements than to have basically blasted myself and then be like, okay, I got really sore from that. I don't know how I can progress anything. Like I can't add partials, I can't add cluster sets, I can't add volume or intensity. I guess I'll just repeat last week again or something like that, right? So I think it was prudent that I came in and ended up not getting sore, but I did train hard enough that I expected to get sore. So a little surprise there. Yesterday, everything also felt a little heavy, I guess is the way I would say it. Like I didn't set any like rep PRs or have like surprising strength or anything like that. I mostly matched performance from before deload week, or on 1 or 2 movements I actually purposefully did less than before deload week to kind of give myself runway to move forward. And then today it was different. I was like really, really surprised. So man, the hack press machine that I have, the kind of like squat sled, I have been stuck between like 7 and 8 reps at 580 pounds on that thing for like months. I just like, I'll get like 7 and then I'll get 8 and then I'll get 7 again and then I'll get 8 again. And I was just like, when am I going to progress on this thing? And so right before deload, I got 8. And so that was kind of like my rep PR with the form that I'm using. And the 8th rep was like a 0 RIR. Like I got stuck in the middle. I was like spewing out of my mouth and like it was just like a disgusting rep, right? And then today I did all the exact same training leading up to the hack press and I put 580 pounds on there. And the first rep felt really easy, and I looked over and I was like, is that really 580? Like, what's going on, right? So I just kept going and going, and I got 10, and it was like 2 or 3 RIR. So I beat my rep total by 2, and I had reps in reserve. So again, I like get out of the machine and I like look at it and I'm like, did I like miscount the weight or something? And no, like it was legitimately 580 pounds. So I did a second set and I got 9. So I did 19 reps over 2 sets. And prior to deload week, I went 8 and then 6. So I was getting 14 reps over 2 sets. So I added 5 reps and I had some RIR in the tank, which is like like I'm still confused by it. I don't even understand how that could happen. Like it would have made sense if I was also improving everything on the first day, where it was like, you know, okay, like I really needed that week off. Like very obviously my body is recovered and I'm finally like demonstrating adaptations and things like that. But this was just a unique application that occurred on the hack press machine, and I'm not going to complain about it. It's just really cool. So yeah, I guess active recovery week for the win when it comes to at least that one machine and that one exercise. You know.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's not always across the board, right? You said like other things, I'm about the same, I'm asking reps or whatever, and then something like that will just, I mean, 5 reps over 2 sets is a lot.
With RIR in the tank, yeah.
Yeah, especially with RIR, and props to you for not kind of pushing it to the house when you're like, hey, I'm at 9 or whatever, I'm at 10 and I got more, I'm gonna get them.
Right.
I don't think I would be able to use that reserve because I'm like, I don't know the next time it's gonna feel this good. I need to push it now.
Right. Well, yeah, so now I already have anxiety about next week because I'm like, fuck, now I got to beat 10. Like, I should have set my standards a little lower, you know? But that's, like, kind of what goes through my head is if I do go to the house on that and get, like, 12 or 13 on that set, then I go into next week already feeling defeated because I'm like, I literally did everything I could the prior week. I'd rather kind of go into next week confident, being like, hey, I did 10 and I still have more to give, so.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so I'm really happy about that. And then I guess we'll just kind of see how the rest of the week plays out. One other thing I wanted to touch on in regards to nutrition, even though we're kind of doing a training episode here. So I lost weight every single day through my week off from the gym. Total of 2.0 pounds over 6 days. And it went from 190.6 to 188.6 over the week. And then yesterday, my first day back training, I granted I did eat some extra carbs. I had about 100 extra carbs because I just needed it. Like I was so depleted. But I woke up this morning and I was basically 2 pounds heavier again. So all of those 2 pounds that I lost from not training came back. I don't actually think that like I didn't lose anything during that week. Like I was very diligent and I was in a deficit the whole time and all this stuff. So I think that the jump in 2 pounds is a result of like cell volumization, fluid retention, glycogen,
water,
all those different things.
You said an extra 100. You said an extra 100 grams of carbs, right? That's gonna pull an extra 300 extra grams of water, and that 454 grams per pound. That's a pound right there, just in carbs and water inside the muscle cell and liver cell, or muscle cells and liver. So I mean, just in that alone, and then any kind of training induced inflammation, like that's easy.
Yeah. So I'm actually really happy about it. Like it's probably the first time in my whole period of dieting, like 12 weeks or whatever, that I'm like, yes, the scale jumped. I'm so happy, because literally at the end of that week off, I was like flat and I was feeling small, and it's subtle stuff that only you can see on yourself or an expert eye can see, because the number of people that DM'd me and were like, you're not flat, you're not small. Like, I'm like, well, it's all relative. And like, so yeah, I just didn't like the way that looked, and I think that echoes a lot of the sentiments you're feeling, and you're like, I need to wrap my diet up because like every day I just look at myself and I'm small and I'm flat and like all these things. So.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just like it's very recently started feeling like the bit of the fatigue on me, and then like same thing, like we went hiking, and I was like, okay, well I don't want to like push myself too hard because I don't want to like completely fall the fuck apart, 3/4 up there or something like that, or just then be like exhausted. So just things like I have to be a little bit more reserved from like my personality or things that I would like to do, just by playing it a little bit smarter and knowing like, hey, don't dig the hole so deep that you're not going to be able to get out of it, type of thing.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like we always mention, like we're not on a deadline. We don't have any specific purpose for getting lean aside from like learning from our own experience and then being able to apply it in the future. And so all these reasons, like there's just no reason. So I think if I hadn't set my mindset to be like, I'm going to get to like the low 180s and see what it looks like, then I would probably right now just be like, shit, I've been dieting 12 weeks. Like, I don't really want to do this anymore. But to be honest, like it's weird what your mind can do when you set your mind to something, because those thoughts of like, fuck this diet, like I'm ready to move on from it, those are just like, very short-lived, fleeting emotions that run through my head, and then immediately they're gone, and I'm like refocused back on the objective. So, luckily, I haven't been too hungry except for yesterday when I started training again, and then suddenly I was like really, really hungry. But it's interesting how you go a whole week of not training, and I eat like a bird, and I don't even feel hungry. So training really is like that stimulus for the appetite, I think, more than anything else.
The one last thing I want to say before we move on. Yesterday I was very hungry. I like was eating much earlier than I normally would, and I was like, man, why am I so hungry today? It's because my sleep was so poor. And that's there's tons of research and stuff on that. The people who sleep less eat more, and it was just something like, it's been so long since I've had a really poor night of sleep. I've been feeling like really kind of grateful, I guess, that through this whole diet, like I haven't been hungry like really at all. Only if I plan them, if I space a meal too far, or I end up going to the gym a lot later than I planned and don't get the extra meal in first or whatever. But yesterday was the first day where I'm like, okay, it's like one, I'm eating my third meal now, and it's only like 1 o'clock type of thing. And then it hit me. I was like, oh, I'm exhausted today. I had that really shitty night of sleep. Like, that's why I'm so hungry. And then last night slept really, really good again. And now I'm back to feeling like how I would, on Saturday and stuff. So it's one of those things, like those are your two kind of gas pedals of recovery and energy. And when one goes down, tanks hard, the other one you rely a lot more on.
You may even know the study that I'm going to reference, but I've heard it referenced a few times where they sleep deprived people and gave them calories, and it was like you can eat as much as you want, and they had like a control group that slept normal and then a sleep deprivation group, and they were told to like just eat to fulfillment or something along those lines, and the group that didn't sleep ate like 1.5 or 2 times as much food as the group that did sleep.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember the lab that was out of or who did it, but yeah, that's a really cool study.
Yeah. All right, cool. Should we answer some questions? I think they're all training related, right?
They are all training related. Let's do it. So I will kick this first one off over to you. Question is, how to decide when to use a back-off set or a cluster set or rest pause set. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and then they put in parentheses, I'm not even entirely sure the difference between cluster and rest pause sets. And so I looked at Aaron as we were going over this, and I'm like, yeah, what is the difference between a cluster and a rest pause set? So Aaron, do you want to talk about, because you're the one that came up with this kind of idea. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so we'll talk about the cluster versus the rest pause first, and then we'll talk about the back-off set after. So I have always used a cluster set as kind of like a predetermined set of reps that you would repeat with about like 15 to 20 seconds in between. So for example, I've been doing some cluster sets on a cable front delt raise, and I'm just kind of adding 1 rep to the cluster each week. So what I'll do is, like, if I think I can do this weight for maybe, like, if I took it to like a true RAR of around like maybe 11 or so, I'm going to start and do like 7 to 8. And then I'm going to rest like 15, 20 seconds. I generally do 20. I'm going to do another like 8 or 7, whatever I pick. And then I'm going to do that like 1 more time. So I would, kind of look at clusters as like predetermined repetition amounts that you're going to do within that kind of short period of time. And then the rest pause is generally a little bit higher of an intensity technique, where it is going to be to pretty much failure. So let's say you have a weight for that is like a hard 10. You do that hard 10, you go to like 1 RAR, you give yourself like 3-4 breaths, probably not even up to like 20 seconds, maybe 10-15 seconds, and then you get as many reps as you can get again, which is probably going to be maybe 4, 3 to 4. Then you give yourself another like 3 to 4 breaths, approximately 10-12 seconds. Hit that again, that's probably going to drop to the 1 to 3, and then you basically drop until what? You can't get less than like 2, or if you do get 1 or something like that. Depends on how far you want to go. But that's generally how I've used like the difference between a cluster or a rest pause. Is a cluster is a little bit more structured from the beginning, and like, hey, I'm going to plan to do this, and then I'm going to repeat 8, 8, 8. The rest pause is pretty much just swinging for the fences, see what I can get, and just hold on because it's going to hurt really fucking bad.
Yeah. So I think I agree with that. I really like that designation. And as I look back at kind of the way I've been programming, I use clusters to kind of define both, like for both the way that you described what a cluster is to you and what a rest pause is. I kind of just call them all clusters. But I think kind of after this discussion, I may change the way that I write this. But I do want to give kind of a couple other specific examples of kind of big names in the industry that use these techniques. So there is a protocol by John Meadows called the Rule of 25. And I would consider this like a rest pause method based on the way you described it. So you take essentially a 10 to 12 RM weight and you more or less go to failure or close to it. And then again, yeah, it's like 15 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that. You basically just get up and like shake your legs out and then go back in and do it again. And you just go until you get 25 reps. So like you said, it's probably like 4, 3, 3, 3, 2, 1 or something like that. Like whatever it is, you just try to get to 25 and then you get a whole shit ton of effective reps in there. Scott Stevenson has a cluster protocol that I believe he calls muscle rounds. And so he essentially will have you do something like sets of 4 reps until you can no longer do 4. And so I don't exactly know if there's a buy-in set to that. Like I don't know if you do like a 10 to 12 rep set to start and then you're just doing sets of 4, or if you just pick like a 10 rep weight and then you do 4 reps and then do 4 reps and then do 4 reps and do 4 reps with like a designated period in between. But based on your definition, that would kind of be like a cluster. And then N1 also has a cluster type sequence called incomplete rest method, IRM. And so what they essentially do there is they have you pick like a 15 rep max weight. This works really well on like lateral raises and leg extensions and isolation movements. So you'll pick like a 15 rep weight and then you'll do 8 reps with a 20 to 30 second rest in between. I think they actually designate 30 seconds. So it depends whether you're doing 6 or 8 total clusters. I think if you're doing like 6 total clusters, you might be able to shorten that rest closer to like 20 seconds. And if you're doing 8 clusters, maybe you take 30 seconds rest, but somewhere in there. And then your goal is just to hit 8 reps every time, which is about like 50% of the reps that you could achieve based on that 15 rep max that you chose. So I think those are kind of all different examples of ways you might implement cluster and rest pause type stuff. Regarding Backoff set, so Backoff set is like a full set. Like it's just like doing another working set. So your question was kind of like how to decide when to use each of these. And so I would say time is probably a pretty big component. Like if you need to get 3 or 4 quality sets in close to failure, there's a number of ways you could do that. You could do one top set with like a whole bunch of rest pause sets after. You could do a cluster sequence like that, like we talked about. You could do a top set and a back off set and then do some rest pause stuff after the back off set. You could do a top set, back off set, then a drop set. So, I mean, there's a number of different ways. You just kind of need to use the tools based on the volume and the intensity that you need for that session. So I don't know that I can give like a general, like, you should use a back off set here or a cluster set here or a rest pause set here. It's more just like what fits the needs of your programming and what's going to give you the stimulus that you're after in that moment for that session that's going to help you move forward in the big picture. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing that I think could be a little bit help you decide is if you have like if you're limited by equipment availability. So for instance, the example that came to my head when you were talking about the N1 style, the incomplete rest method, right now when I'm doing, so like one of my favorite lateral delt movements is the like prone incline 45, lateral dumbbell lateral raise.
Yep.
The hard part is like if I'm doing 15 pounds, I can do like, 18 to 20 on my first set. It's a lot. I don't want to be doing sets of 18 to 20. But then if I go up to the 20 pounds, right, it's a massive, 25% increase in weight. I can only do like 6 or 7 reps or something like that. It's like a massive drop off. So something like that cluster method could be really, really beneficial where I use those 15s and then I do like sets of 8 with 30 seconds, 20, 30 seconds rest in between, and I'll get like a much more, effective reps in a shorter period of time. It's more, in a more challenging type of thing. So if you were someone who's limited by, people are different countries are going back in lockdown and stuff like that. I've got a client in Australia who's in lockdown again. Like that could be a really appropriate approach using like rest pause or something like that. Because if you only have, I don't know, 30 kilogram dumbbell or whatever, and you're trying to train chest, you don't want to do 25, 28 reps or something like that. Like the rest pause or something those could be much more appropriate techniques to use if you were limited by, equipment availability and such.
Yeah, totally. I think it's important to point out that when you're doing those like sets of 8 though with like a 20 rep max weight, that you're probably not getting any effective reps until you get into like the 4th, 5th, 6th set. Like, you're not even within 5 reps of failure at that point, if you're doing 8 with a 20 rep weight, right?
Yeah,
So that's true. Important to note. I actually think that something that's very under discussed or underutilized in situations of lack of equipment access or whatever is drop sets. Because they're a super effective way to get many effective reps in with minimal rest and very time efficient. There was even a study, I think we talked about it on one of the older podcasts, where we went over a bunch of those studies on volume and stuff like that. But they compared, I think it was 5 drop sets to 3 straight sets. And it was more or less the same for the population that they tested. So that would be like either you do like 10 to 12 rest, 10 to 12 rest, 10 to 12 rest, or you do 1 set of 10 to 12 and then you drop and then you drop and then you drop and then you drop again. So there's 4 drops, 5 total sets to equal 3 straight sets. But in the grand scheme of things, like, you probably save time because when you're resting between straight sets, that's a significant loss of time versus drop sets where there is no rest. So as a means of being time efficient, I think it's a great technique. But I also think it's really important to note, because I've had a number of people message me recently, very intrigued by a lot of these topics that we talk about on the podcast and that I'm covering in my stories. And then I later find out that these people are more in the beginner intermediate stage of their journey. And so I really think that when we're talking about like cluster sets and rest pause sets and drop sets and stuff like this, like just don't worry about that. Don't worry about doing a lat focused pull down when you're a novice. Like, just do big compound movements for the most part. If you want to throw some isolation work in too, but I would say isolation work comes before rest pause and cluster sets and stuff like this. So save intensity techniques for when you need them. And don't just implement them because we're talking about them and they sound sexy or whatever. They're something that should come out of necessity versus desire.
Exactly, necessity versus desire. And when you're still kind of like in that intermediate or beginner stage, like you have so much, like the road for progress is still so far out ahead of you. You don't need it. Like kind of what you mentioned earlier in today's episode. You're like, I've been only getting the same 7 to 8 reps on this, at this weight for months now. Like right. That is when you need these other kind of more necessity when, it's just the road for progression gets shorter, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then one other thing, because he said when to decide when to use each of these things. On really, really big compound movements, I personally am not a huge fan of doing like cluster and rest pause work. I think like the biggest compound movement I would go to do that would be like a chest supported row or a pull down, but I don't think I would use that stuff for the most part on like leg presses or hack squats or back squats or RDLs or anything like that. So like I always would opt for a Backoff set and just do 2 straight sets before I would kind of get into a hole and doing multiple sets that are basically like failure sets on a extremely damaging movement like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next question, the range of motion debate, active versus full range of motion. What do we believe in, implement, and why? You want to start or should I?
Yeah, I'll start. So okay. I think the most appropriate way to answer this, in my opinion, is it depends on the movement. For example, there are some movements, and one of the most common ones I know, Bryan, you and I will speak about is that like iliac kind of focused row. That is a great example to use the active range of motion. Another really good example would be like a dumbbell lateral raise, right? With a certain type of movement, especially like some dumbbell or barbell type movements, when your arm is coming in past that 90 degrees, like there's no you're not getting any gravitational pull on the muscle or anything like that. So using a full range of motion for lateral raises with a dumbbell, you're not getting any work done there. You're just going through a literally range of motion for the sake of range of motion. So stopping where you don't have any more gravitational pull that's supported by the musculature, it's instead supported by your skeletal system, that would be a really, really good example. So I think the most appropriate way I think to answer it is depending on the movement. Now, for example, if we are talking about a hack squat or a pendulum squat or something like that, I am going to err on the side of using a full range of motion so long as my skeletal structure supports it, my mobility supports it, and I'm not compromising my lumbar spine or anything like that by overstretching my range of motion just for the sake of full ROM. So things like that, full range of motion, I think is going to make the most sense. But things where you're not really training the muscle you think you're training by going full range of motion, it just is kind of superfluous, and you're not doing what you think you're doing anyway. So again, it really depends on the movement.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that designation. I think that full range of motion is a really safe catch-all to ensure that you're not missing any range of motion. When you start messing with partial range of motions, you better be sure that the partial range of motion that you're using is the most important, or even if it's not the most important, it is the purposeful range of motion that you want to use. An example of this, as we've talked about a lot, is people like bros who like, you can think of the bench press as an example, where they will prioritize the top of the movement, but they'll never actually like touch the chest at the bottom. They'll just sit here and kind of lock out and then come halfway down and lock out and come halfway down. Well, oops, lost my microphone. I'm back. So that's what happens when I demonstrate exercises in the air as I'm going. I need some wireless headphones. I don't even know what I was saying. The range of motion is essentially, you want to make sure that you're using the range of motion that you want to be using, right? So we've talked about how the bottom, the lengthen position, is the most important. So like if someone's going to partial range of motion, a bench press, I would much rather see them at the bottom and then just not locking out at the top, and then going to the bottom and not locking out at the top. But no one does that because that means you have to use less weight. So using a partial range of motion, I know this question is about active range of motion, but I think active is in a sense partial, as it's not full. But regarding kind of active range of motion and full range of motion, the iliac lat pull down or row is a really good one, because there are 2 points that you want to make sure that you're not going full range of motion on that movement. So you don't want to overextend at the front. So you don't want to take your shoulder into internal rotation, because as soon as the shoulder goes into internal rotation and you really round out the upper back, then now the movement concentric, the pulling portion, is going to be initiated by those muscles of the upper back and the traps and the rear delts and stuff like that. We purposefully want to stop that range of motion at the active range of motion of the lat. And that is, if you're watching on YouTube, is going to be about right here, because the shoulder has not rounded out yet and the lat is still active. And then by the same token, we don't want to pull past the body. So essentially the reasons being that, the lat is worked in that whole middle portion from elbow in line with body to extension at the top is where the lat is active. If you were to pull beyond those ranges of motion and you were to let your elbow come past your midline and you were to round out your shoulder and internally rotate at the top, you're still going to work your lat through its full range of motion. You're just going to also be working other muscles that are going to help move through that range of motion. So while there might be slightly less lat stimulus, the lat is still going to work through the full range of motion. It's not going to be under tension the entire time. So this is kind of why I say that if you're just not sure what to do, just do the full range of motion, because then the muscle you're trying to work will be worked. It will just be worked alongside other things. So if you're going to use an active range of motion, make sure that you're using an active range of motion that you're super knowledgeable about what that active range is for that specific muscle group. And like N1 has a biomechanics course that you can check out. I believe they even have like a free course that you can get on biomechanics just by entering your email address. So it's like, it's a small piece of their kind of educational puzzle. But yeah, that would be my thoughts for the most part. And I also agree fully that actually, let me backtrack that a little bit. In most cases, I agree that like on a pendulum squat or a leg press or something like that you should use full range of motion. But I think even within the notion of full range of motion, there's different ways in which you can kind of manipulate your knee path to prioritize more or less glute, adductor, and quad. So like, if we want our quads to be the primary mover on a movement, then we probably want to keep the knees mostly forward. We don't want to splay the knees out to the side with like a too wide of a stance, because as soon as the toes point out and the stance widens a little bit and we kind of like, drive those knees out, now the adductors are doing a lot of that work from the bottom to get us going again. Whereas if the knees can kind of stay forward over the toes and we don't actually splay the knees apart at the bottom, then now a lot of that tension is going to be directed into the quad. Personally, I don't do that because I want my adductors to be worked in that movement. I don't do adductor work. I don't do isolation adductor work. I do isolation quad work. So I would like to do my squatting style movements where my adductors are a huge contributor there. By the same token, if you want to kind of prioritize your glutes more, you have to change where your feet sit on the platform. Like if you want quads, you're going to go with ankle dorsiflexion, where your feet sit super low on the platform and your knees go well over your toes. But if you want glutes, you would move your feet higher up on the platform so that you have a vertical shin at the top. And now it's still a leg press or a hack squat or whatever it is, but now it's going to prioritize the glutes more than the quads. So this is less maybe about active versus full range of motion and more about kind of the placement of the feet and how that might affect your range of motion. But I think, again, like the more knowledge you have, the more you can apply, and practically you'll probably get more out of it.
You summed that up really, really well. I don't think I have anything else to add on that one.
Cool. So the next question is, how important is progressive overload when trying to maintain physique?
So I am going to really leverage that maintain in this question.
That was actually, I clarified it with the person that asked it, and that's really what they meant. They're like, I'm not trying to gain muscle or anything. I just want to maintain my physique.
So there may be research on this. There's none that I have read. I'm not saying it's not out there. I just haven't seen any or read any personally. My kind of intuition would kind of point me towards that progressive overload is not going to be very important for maintaining your physique. It's really just keeping enough food in you, right? Just to make sure you're not, sacrificing any of the kind of muscle you have built and just staying trained. You could just continue doing similar weights you have been, switching things up a little bit, trying some different, maybe intensity techniques to do lower volumes or different things. But I think when trying to just maintain what you already have, trying to add new weight on the bar probably isn't that important. Bryan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here and just say that not that I think progressive overload is important, but I think defining progressive overload is important, because progressive overload is not something that we're trying to do or that we have to do to get stronger. It's the result of something that already happened. So for this person that is trying to maintain their physique, so you go into this cycle. So you have a 12-week cycle ahead of you, and you go into it and you're like, sweet, my goal is just to maintain my physique. I'm not going to try and add any weight to the movements this cycle. I'm just going to lift 100 pounds for 10 reps the whole time. Great in theory, but since progressive overload is an adaptation and not something that you have to do, so you do 100 pounds for 10 reps in week 1, what happens if progressive overload actually happens? Like, you now are doing 100 pounds for 10, but it's super easy. You could do 15. And then what happens when you do 100 pounds for 10, but you could do 20? I mean, at that point, the 100 pounds is no longer stimulative for you. So I think at that point, you're not even getting any, quote, effective reps. So it's a difficult question to answer, because you really don't want to look at progressive overload as like, I have to add weight to ensure that I'm progressing. it's something that just happens, or it doesn't happen, right? But if you're doing well with your nutrition, you're sleeping well, and you're training, it, yeah, I can't imagine that like 100 pounds for 10 would still be the same difficulty in week 1 as it is in week 12. So I think that there will be a point where you have to match your output level or your output effort. And if that requires you to increase weight or reps so that you can maintain that same level of effort, then that's kind of what you have to do. Or else I think that your physique would slide backwards just because you're no longer working within, close enough reps of failure.
Yeah, I think that that was a really good stance to take. You have to match an effort over time, and
Right.
as progressive overload, as the adaptations occur, that may be more reps, that may be a little bit more weight, but your probably relative intensity could remain the same.
Yeah. Relative intensity for sure. I also wonder whether like you could like lower your protein intake and I don't exactly know. Like, I mean, it's an interesting question because you don't often get people that want to just like maintain. Like, I'm going to keep training hard, but I don't really want to get any better. Um, so I mean, like, you could lower your protein. You wouldn't gain muscle. You wouldn't spike MPS as much that way. I don't think that's like a great solution, but I guess that's one option. Aaron's like, no,
No.
of course not. Never lower your protein.
Unless it's like
You know,
absurdly high, but
did, did
yeah.
you know that John Meadows in the last 3 years has been basically eating 100 grams of protein a day for a number of years now?
Really?
Yeah, he talks about it a lot. He's like, yeah, in 2018, I just decided that I'm just not going to force protein down anymore. I'm just going to eat what I want to eat. And so he's like, I average about 100 grams of protein a day, and it's been 3 years of that, and he hasn't gotten any smaller.
There, I wondered if there's any other reasons he hasn't gotten smaller.
He apparently is only taking TRT now at like a maintenance dose.
Yeah, but that was my joke.
Yeah.
Like, that's just so low from just an eating standpoint. I mean, if you have a protein shake per day, like a 25-gram protein shake, right?
Yeah.
That's 25 grams.
One
You have
serving of meat. Yeah.
3 ounces. Let's go on the low
Right.
end. 3 ounces of meat's like 20 grams. You do that twice per day. That gets you at 40. We're at like 65 already. And like 3 ounces of meat is small.
And he's 220 pounds, So.
Yeah. That's interesting, but it is kind of cool to know, from that.
Yeah, he said his theory is that it's the training that's the stimulus, not the food at this point in his training journey, that he's just kind of maxed out, his potential, and that the training is the stimulus that keeps him where he is versus the nutrition at this point.
And I do know, obviously, since he had that health scare like last
Yeah.
summer, he's down somewhat of weight. I don't know how much. I couldn't even guess to what, but that is kind of interesting to see. All right, next question. If you're more sore the second or third day, is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so the amount of damage that you created in the muscle is going to be somewhat correlated to when your soreness takes place. So I talk about this a lot in like blog posts and podcasts and stuff, but ultimately our goal is to be mildly sore for the first and possibly the second day. By the third day, we generally want to feel that starting to subside so that by the fourth day, we can train the same muscle group again with no issues. If you are more sore as the days go on, like third day specifically, I used to think that that was a result of training larger muscles because you would always find that like smaller muscle groups would get sore within, 10 to 20 hours for me usually. And then larger muscle groups like legs and back would usually take like 48 to 60 plus hours. But over the course of time, reading studies and kind of refining my own training style, I realized that I was essentially just creating a shit ton of damage in those big muscle groups. And that's why the soreness was delayed. So it's just harder to damage those smaller, more resilient muscle groups. Like you can do endless sets of like lateral delts and biceps and barely get sore at all. Or at least if you do, it's going to be like pretty much next day. But really, when you get into those like big compound movements with like a huge lengthened overload, like our squats and our RDLs, our deadlifts, different kind of free weight bench pressing and bent over rowing and stuff like that, you can do a lot of damage. So being sore on that third day it means you did too much. You either went too heavy, you went too close to failure, you did too many sets, a number of different reasons. If that happens 2 weeks in a row, then I would say, that's really a sign that you need to kind of pull things back a little bit. But it's very possible that may have just happened 1 week, and then the repeated bout effect kicks in on your next week, and maybe you're only sore for 2 days, and then the repeated bout effect kicks in again the third week, and suddenly you're only sore for 1 day, and everything kind of falls in line perfectly from there. But if you're continuing to get the most sore toward like the end of the second day and into the third day, I would really, really look at your volume, effort, and frequency, and kind of make some adjustments there.
Question I have for you before I add my
Yep.
thoughts here. Do you, because there were some numbers you spit out that said 10 to 20 hours. You're someone who trains in the morning mostly. Do you ever find yourself getting sore before the end of the day, the same day you trained?
Yeah, so usually for chest, I'm almost always starting to get sore before I go to bed at night. So like I'll kind of, put my arm out, pull back, and I'll feel like that tightness in the side of the pec. So I'll usually feel that within 10 hours of training. I have started getting some very minor quad and hamstring before bed on the days that I train. Whereas usually that would take, like in my prior life, like, 5-10 years ago training, it would take like 2+ days for me to really have that leg soreness settle in. So the fact that I'm able to kind of feel that a little bit more the night of is an encouraging sign for me, because when I wake up in the morning, that's usually the sorest I'm going to be for legs. And then throughout that day after, it kind of like slowly dissipates. And then I go to bed that night and I'm 1 day away from being clear of soreness. But yeah, I really do notice that if I don't feel the soreness until the middle or end of the next day, then I'm already like 36 hours in since I've trained. And that's just way too late. Like by that point, I'm not going to be recovered in time to do that muscle group again.
Yeah, there was three kind of things that I wanted to add on to that. What you said with in terms of being sore. One for myself personally, I'm never sore the same day. I will feel a little fatigue, like going up the stairs. I can like feel my legs just like moving a little bit heavier, but it's almost always the next morning when I wake up that I can feel the soreness. A couple other things that can be impacting your soreness that are very, very big ones here. Hydration level, right? That's massive. The proximity of when you get food in after training. Like if you go train legs and then you go to let's say you go smash legs, then you go to the beach for like 5 hours or something like that and don't need anything and you're a little bit dehydrated, you are going to wake up considerably more sore. And then alcohol, same thing. If you like train legs or something and then go have like a drinking night, you are going to be considerably more sore, because those things are just either going to what's the word I'm looking for? Like delay the recovery process from facilitating, impede the recovery process from operating at a higher capacity, specifically like the alcohol and the hydration. And those are things that wouldn't necessarily impact your baseline, but you're lowering your baseline because of those activities.
Yeah, those are all really good points too. I mean, there's a number of factors that goes into being sore for sure. In your case, I think the reason you don't feel the soreness till the next day is because you generally train in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So if you look at like the timing of like, okay, you trained at 3 p.m. and then you wake up at 6 a.m., then you're like 15 hours. So you're right inside that like 10 to 20 hour window that I was talking about for kind of what we want for the first signs of soreness. But I really, to kind of put another thought in here, I don't think you should necessarily be sore at all. I mean, it would, even me, who like I know the science says you don't ever have to be sore. If I never got sore, I would probably be like, oh, maybe I could train like a little bit harder, like maybe I'm not doing enough. But like honestly, the factors that I use much more importantly than soreness are those post session and in session subjective measures of am I feeling fatigue in the muscle? Are my reps dropping? Like if I'm going 12-10-8 or 12-10-9 or whatever it is, and I'm seeing reps drop set to set, then obviously I'm fatiguing the muscle. The post-workout feeling of walking up and down the stairs, or shit, man, like 4, 5, 6 hours after leg days, I like still feel it sometimes. Like I'll be laying down playing with Bryson downstairs, and then he'll jump up and run up the stairs, and I'm like trying to jump up and run after him, and suddenly I'm like, whoa, like that happened a little too fast, you know? So there's a lot of things that you can feel to know that you had a successful session without having to be sore. And a perfect example of that is my back. Like, my back is my best muscle group probably, and it never is sore, like ever sore. That doesn't mean that I'm not training my back enough. Like, it's clearly, it handles more volume than any of my other muscle groups. I think I do like 12 or 13, 14 sets for back in a normal week. I train it on every upper body day. It's the only muscle group that's trained on all 3 of my upper body days. And it never gets sore. So you really don't have to be sore. And I would encourage you to look at soreness as something that you want less of than more of.
I agree with that. Really well put. All right, this last one I'm going to kick over to you. And
Okay.
the question is, what angle is best for incline pressing? Is 15 degrees enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think anywhere between like 15 and 50 is probably a pretty good range. It depends what you want to get out of it and kind of what line of push you're trying to use for your dumbbells. Obviously, if you're doing like a 15 degree, then you're going to bias a lot more of that kind of mid pec and a little less upper pec. Whereas if you're up at like 50 degrees, you're going to bias a little more of the front delt and clavicular pec line. So they all have utility and they're all great. I would say that the best use of varying angles of degrees would be to just change it each cycle. Like, I wouldn't change it week to week, but I would choose like 15 degrees and I would stick with it for 10 to 20 weeks or whatever long your cycles are, and then go to 50 degrees and do that for a cycle. And so I think they're all good. I don't really have a problem with any of them as long as they're not like so steep that it's all shoulders, or so flat that it's just flat and it's not incline anymore.
Yeah, that was going to be my advice there. It's just as you rotate through your cycles, change. Obviously you don't have that much variation with a lot of the benches. Give you kind of predetermined angles you can use. Yeah. Use one, go up to the next. If there's a third, use it for the one after that, and recycle back down. And you can kind of go with that. See what feels best, see where you feel strongest, but most importantly, what doesn't give you any kind of joint discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually like a 15 degree press. That's kind of the low range that I use as the first hole on the bench. And I actually really I like that a lot better than flat, because for whatever reason, I don't feel as stable against a flat bench as I do with like even a slight incline. So generally, I would choose a 15 degree incline over doing a flat press if given the choice.
I would agree with that 100%.
Cool. Yeah, I think we jammed through that pretty well. I don't think we have any other questions today. Next week, Dr. Eric Helms.
Very excited.
Yes, should be good. I got to do some preparation, come up with some good, intelligent questions for the man, and I'm really amped. This is our first guest that I'm slightly intimidated by. So
I would agree
it should
with
be
that.
good.
Yeah. It's we definitely got to make sure we put together some really, really like context specific nuanced questions that we can go deep on, that have like a soul type of person that they can apply to, type of thing.
So yeah, we're going to be talking about primarily like auto regulation of training and different concerns for the advanced trainee, as well as a couple questions that I have, or a question I have about maintenance volume and the research around that.
Yep. So look forward to that next guys week. Anything else from you, Bryan, as we wrap this one up?
No, man. I thought it was a good episode. We'll catch up next week.
All right. So thank you guys as always for listening, and we will talk to you next week.